Next step is glazing the interiors. So you have the mugs, the bottoms have been waxed, and I'm going to put a white liner glaze on the interior of the mugs. I'm going to do entire board at one time, and I'm going to got over here. I've got a bucket. It's the green thing. It's a 5-gallon bucket full of glaze with a mixer stuck in it. I'm going to leave it in there now because I'm going to do a couple different boards of mugs at the same time, and I'll mix it in between each batch, each board of a dozen or so. I've got a funnel and a measuring cup to scoop the glaze out of the bucket and pour it into the interior of the cup. And once I've got the cup full, I'll pour it out. But rather than just pour it out into the bucket, I will pour it out into the next mug. So I'll go down the line, glaze the interior of all of these mugs at the same time. Hopefully, sometimes there's a chance that I will run out towards the end because some of this glaze is being absorbed into the interior of each of these mugs as it goes along. Glaze is a suspension of minerals, powdered minerals in water. And the bisqueware, now not just plain clay, but partially on its way to becoming ceramic, all the pores have been voided. All the water is no longer in the pores of the clay, and so that makes it very porous so that it can absorb water like a sponge. And as it does that, it pulls the dry mineral to the surface and holds it there. So as I pour it out, I'm rotating each mug to get it to coat every single surface on the interior. I'm going to go out of shot here, but I got to keep going. Sorry. Didn't frame this very well. One more. Looks like I'm going to make it. I got one last one that I need to do back into the bucket. You can see there's a little left in there, just enough to do the inside of that one. And there we go. That's doing the insides. Alright, so mugs have had a chance to dry overnight. Interior glaze is dry. Dry, slightly fragile powder now. And I'm going to start glazing the sprigs. And got a bamboo brush here and a bucket of black glaze that I've already stirred up. And this is pretty straightforward because a lot of the work happens after this. I just am going to glaze over, get it in frame here, glaze over the entire surface, making particularly sure that there's glaze in all of the recesses because that is where I want it to remain. Flood the surface and let it get down into all those cracks or impressions, depressions. And now I'll do the other side. And the reason I don't have to be particularly careful is that I'll be wiping this most of all of this off afterwards. I'm doing even the areas where I'm going to be wiping it off, like all this open area on the face, because it'll look best if it's had some glaze on it and will have been wiped off. The glaze won't wipe off 100%, and so it just makes it look more even. It will make the surface slightly toasty in the end. But so there, now that is both sides done. You can see that side's starting to dry already. And I'll do the rest of this board. I've got a dozen or so to go, and then I'll be wiping the glaze off. All right, moving on to wiping off the glaze. It's been about a half an hour, I've got a damp sponge, kind of a cushioning sponge, and I'm going to gently wipe off the glaze. It's kind of like similar to wiping an etching plate or letterpress or anything like that, where you want the glaze to remain inside the grooves, but you want to remove it from the surface. That's why a slightly stiffer sponge like this is kind of helpful. So that is what I would consider good. And I'll turn it over and do the other side. Clean up my sponge. And in this case, I'm being very careful not to press too hard, because otherwise the sponge will go down into that center of the T and start wiping the glaze out of that area. So I'm going to go slow, going to gently upread the glaze, try to get it to come off as cleanly as possible. It's never perfect, but I try to do the best I can. And if I happen to wipe off glaze of an area where I don't want it, I can always go back and reapply glaze to that area and then wipe it, let it dry, and wipe it again. It's pretty forgiving for going back and forth. This is, like I said, this is just a powder suspension in water, and so there's no binders or anything like that to cause it to set that would prevent it from being rehydrated. And so I can keep working on it. Sorry if I went out of shot there. We're getting pretty close. I think that looks pretty good. You see a little scumming there. That's just chalkiness in the glaze. As it dries, it'll go away, and if it doesn't, it'll fire to black. Anyway, but there you go. There's both sides. Next is waxing, and then after that, we'll be doing the actual exterior glaze. Okay, so I moved outside because it's nice and beautiful outside. So now I'm to putting the wax on the sprig. And this will prevent, once it's dry, prevent the next layers of glaze from sticking to it. So this area here will be unglazed completely, and this will be black no matter what else I put on top of it. And that's that. All right, we're on to glazing. This is the color scheme that I'm going to be using for the Metamorphoses. It's hard to say sometimes. Mugs that have Chladni on the one side and Tone Burst on the other, and it's going to color coordinate with the label and the cover and the tape pretty nicely, I think. So here's the bucket of glaze. That's going to be the glaze that I'm going to have on the bottom part, and I'm going to dip it in. This has got wax on it that will resist the glaze. This has wax on it, and this has wax on it, so the glaze will flow off after I give it a little shake. So I'm going to dunk it in. This has already been mixed up, and I'm going to dip it down to the bottom of the band and count. I'm just counting to about 20 in my head. Things that I've learned over time is that with certain viscosities of glaze, that a little bit of extra time in the bucket, it'll get a little thicker and it'll look better. But you can see that most of the glaze just flowed right off, and now I've got a little natural sponge that I'll use. Sorry, I keep getting out of the frame here. Clean off any excess glaze. Turn this around. I can also sharpen the edges up where I may not have waxed as well as I should have around the edge of this sprig. You see I've got a little spot underneath the sprig that didn't get glazed. There was an air pocket there. So I've got a little brush here. I'll just flow in a little extra glaze there. And that'll all melt together in the firing. But check it one more time, make sure there's nothing on the bottom. Any glaze that remains on the bottom will become fluid and sticky and stick the mug to the shelf. So don't want that. So there you go. There's one. Can go pretty quickly once I get going. I'm just going to go on to the next one here, do one more. Sorry about the light, does not come across very well. A little too much glare, but gives you the idea what's going on. And you can also see that the glaze dries relatively quickly. It's very soft right now, but the glaze that was on the interior I did yesterday, the white glaze, and I had some opportunity today to put them out in the sun for a little while. It was a nice sunny day, and so that definitely helped dry them out so that there was not a lot of water left inside of them, so that they were still very porous. So they have dried very well now and sucking up all the glaze. So there you go. That's the one color, and then I'll come back and do the next. All right, same thing, different mug. We're on to the Tone Burst mugs, and after thinking about it a lot, I decided to do them all the same color for simplicity's sake, and so that it's not so hard on Barry trying to make listings for different colors. But the color I'm going to do is this very deep blue. That really doesn't, it almost looks black, but it's a very dark navy blue, and you can kind of see it more in the overlap of the white. And I'll do that same white dip over the top. Very popular color. People love this color, and it looks good. It's a great color. So I'll move on to doing a few of these for you. Same thing. I put my hand inside the mug and just kind of expand it a little bit, and that's the safest way to hold on to it. There's other ways to do it, but that's the way that I like the best, rather than grabbing it by the rim. This seems a lot more stable. After a day of doing it, though, my hand gets pretty cramped. So, but I'm gonna dip it in. Same thing. I'm gonna count a little less to this. This glaze covers a little bit better, and it's more opaque. So I don't really need to go that long. And I almost forgot. I need to go deeper. Not to go quite all the way to the rim, but close to it. That's just one of the things you gotta pay attention to while you're working. Up to where the glaze is gonna go. So same thing here. I'm gonna use my sponge to wipe off the excess. I only have one sprig to work with here, but so you can see right here in some areas I didn't cover completely, but that's okay. I'm going to come back and dip white over the very top, and that will give that slightly frosted, hairy kind of look. And the reason for that is the different viscosities of the glaze when they're fluid, when they're actually melting in the kiln. The white glaze, because of the material in it that makes it white, which, you know, in a lot of things, white is just reflection. So that reflective material inside the glaze also makes it a little stiffer, a little less likely to melt. And the blue glaze is very fluid, and especially with the blue colorant in it, it's even more so. It's being pulled down by gravity during the firing. It'll actually kind of droop a little bit. If you looked at it, if you cut this mug in half and you looked at a cross section of the glaze, it would be thicker down here than it was up at the very top. It'll flow like super thick honey during the course of the firing. But because of that, in this area up at the very top, the the blue glaze is flowing, but the white glaze doesn't want to flow as much, and so it pulls apart almost like lace, I like to say. And it'll depend on the heat of the firing, the thickness of the glaze. It can be more dramatic, less dramatic. It really, some parts of it are not really within my control, but you know, that's one of the things that are cool about doing this. So that's glazed in the blue. I'm just gonna do the rest of these and come. All right, it's a couple hours later. I'm gonna finish up the glazing, the Metamorphoses mugs. So I've got the top glaze here all mixed up, ready to go. Move things a little closer. And this was a simple dunk, and I'm gonna overlap the glazes because I like the look of the overlap, the way they layer over one another. And give a little shake. Here's my sponge. Make sure that nothing's gone over the wax. Clean it up and put it down. We're done. That is now ready to go into the kiln and be fired after it dries for a while. I'm going to do another one here real quick. I'm looking more closely at the so everyone's going to be a little different. You can see this one I did up to the top of the tone burst and overlapped a little there. It's all part of the variation. If I had been super consistent of where I placed the two sprigs, they would be easier to keep straight, but I can only look at one side at a time when I'm dunking them, so they'll be different, and they'll each be unique, but that's part of the thing. All right, here's the last dip for the tone burst mugs. So they're now dry, and I'm going to do the top. This glaze is pretty thick. It's a newer batch, and it tends to be on the thick side when it's new, and I've added a little gelling agent to it too, so it's going to stay on pretty thick. So this should be pretty dramatic when it's done. But there's the white glaze over the top, and that should melt down. You can see the blue color a little bit better in this light now, but that's the white over the top of the blue. Next stop, the kiln.